Oh, we could fly. Oh, we could
Now entering the Cup of Johanni zone, a one-woman show that discusses all the non-glamorous things that have to do with writing and getting a book out into the world. Enjoy.
Oh, we could fly. Oh, we could fly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode número 2. Of this season, titled On the Road to My Debut. So today we're going to be discussing about feedback, the good, the bad, the crappy of getting writerly feedback. Are you ready? Great. Let's start with a story. So I've always wanted to write. And I think I got this from my love of reading and just that love of immersing myself in stories because I found joy there. And I was able to disconnect from the world that I was in, the reality that I was in. And that was kind of like my escapism, right? And that's how I dealt with things. And I believe I still do. But this is not about psychoanalyzing me right now. We're going to be talking about feedback. But this is how I need to get to that story, right? By explaining that I've always had like this love of reading and writing, and I wanted to tell stories, right? And I wanted to travel the world and just tell these stories in the written form so that way I can share it with others. So because of that, I wanted to major in journalism, and I did. But then I changed it because, as it is with my parental figure growing up, she explained that that was not a realistic major to have, and that there is no money to be found in there. So I listened. And I changed my major to nursing, a more practical major to have. But the jokes was on all of us, not just on her, but also on me because I psyched. Didn't do that either. Got out of college, joined the military. Been there since, doing something completely different, logistics. But I still maintain the whole love of writing and reading and have kept at it even while in the service, which has been very weird. I started with a blog, and that blog developed into a book blog and reviewing books and steadily writing nonfiction articles on Medium, and then delving into fiction as well on Wattpad, and lastly to where I'm at right now, which is finishing my MFA program, creative writing with National University, and on the road to my debut, my very first book that I'll be self-publishing here shortly in a few months, and a second book thereafter on that series. So all of this to say that consistently for the past 2 years, I've been getting feedback. And I've been getting feedback first away from that MFA writing program in National University because at first I wasn't too sure that I wanted to go and do a master's program, a master's degree. But like I said, we'll discuss that in another episode so that way I can share that with you as to why I made that decision. And it has a lot of factors into it. But I was getting feedback from my writing, which was very amateurish at first. Of course, I mean, we all have to start from somewhere. No one, like, right, is born a super genius of sorts, right? So the feedback was just, for me, it was horrible. It was not working. It was something that made me want to give up, right, on a love that I have had for so long. And that to me was brutal because from my experience in the army, and this is so I'm sorry, apologize in advance if I kind of like dip into that side of me, but that's where a lot of my experiences will come from when I try to analyze certain things. And I know from that experience that when I give feedback to someone else, that feedback is intended to make that process or that person better. And while I was getting feedback on my fiction stories or my short stories or so forth, I noticed that the feedback was not conducive to me getting better because I didn't feel that nurturing coming from that person, right? Those pieces of advice that may help me to get better and to get my writing better. So that was a red flag, but I kept at it. And I kept at it because I'm very stubborn that way. I have to like bang up my face, my nose, and break a few teeth before I learn, maybe that's not the right way to do this, or maybe that's not the right path to take. Maybe you should take another path, or you should do it differently. Mind you, I learned a lot as well from the bad feedback that I received at the beginning, and I didn't just learn what not to do. I learned how to be a better critiquer. Is that even a word, right? How to be a respectful critiquer or a respectful person to give feedback. So then down the line, when I did started giving feedback to others on their writing, I always kept that in the forefront of my mind, that memory of how I felt when I received that feedback, and how much of a waste of time it was for me. And I can just imagine for the other person that came up with the feedback that I ended up not using because it didn't work for me, So, and in the end, we both wasted our time. That person giving me that feedback and me not really receiving it. So I learned that from that negative experience, and that's what happened. And so, but mind you, now I learned a lot from that feedback, um, and not just on what not to do, but on how to approach that person respectfully, so that way you can give that person the best feedback. Because once again, when I compare what I know about feedback as being something that is constructive to that other person learning or making a process or self better, then I know that when I am getting feedback from somebody else, it's supposed to be doing that to me. But also, on the same token, right? If I am giving feedback to somebody else, I am to be respectful of how that person receives things, verbal and nonverbal, and so forth, right? And be aware of that. So that way, when I give that feedback, it helps that person out. And I know this may sound like super complicated and super tedious, right? But really, if you are aware of yourself and if you're aware of others, it's something that is almost simultaneous. It's almost automatic to how you deal with other people and with yourself. It's called interpersonal skills. And I think that sometimes we are lacking that. And when we're having these transactions, these communications, these relationships with other, and they don't have to be romantic relationships, just any relationship, then they become dysfunctional because we're not communicating with one another in a productive manner or productively. For example, I write in English and Spanish, and I do some Spanglish in there as well as some Dominican lingo in a lot of my stories because, again, I'm writing from a place of knowledge, from a place of experience. And some of the feedback that I got before joining the MFA program was that, well, this is in Spanish. Who's gonna understand this? That was one feedback. Another feedback was like, are you writing this to sell it in Latin America? We are in the US, and we speak English here. That was another type of feedback that I received as well. And it was just as well as other other types of feedback that kind of like name call or kind of say things about my intellect and so forth because I wrote a certain way or in a certain format and so forth. So that kind of feedback was not helpful to me at all. It even stopped me from writing because it made me second guess myself, and it made me kind of think twice about what I was doing and if I was the right person to do this, to write these stories, because obviously I'm getting this feedback, right? All this negative feedback that it's not the right thing to do. And I wrote an article about it as well in Medium. I even went to a writing conference in San Diego and La Jolla, and I got similar feedback on my last day there as well. And I reacted negatively to it. It was not a good experience. It was not a good place to be in during that time. But I learned from that. I later on down the line, once I got my head right out of the sand and was able to think things through and think things objectively, I was able to understand that maybe those people were not my audience. These people that gave me that feedback, they're not the people that I'm writing for. They're not the people that I'm trying to reach. Because if they're telling me that the language that I'm using, the wordings, the Spanglish, the slang, right, is something that turns them off, then I know that's not the person to ask for feedback from. And I'm not saying that I need to go out and seek out people that will only give me good feedback, right? And that will only give me like this brown nosing feedback, because we also don't need that. I don't need that as a writer, right? Because it's not going to make me better. But what I also don't need is to ask somebody who is not my target audience, who won't read that kind of genre or type of stories that I'm making, to give me feedback, because right off the bat, they are going to be turned off by it because that's not what they normally read. And I learned that. I had to think about it objectively, because if you listen to the last episode, you know how personal and how sensitive I am to my writing, because the writing, what I do while it's fiction, it's tapping into an experience that I had. It's tapping into an emotion that I experienced, a point in my life that I lived. And oftentimes when people say this sucks, it's almost like you're saying to me that my experience sucked, that my experience was invalid. And I'm still learning to kind of not put up a wall. That's the wrong word to say, even though that was the first thing that came to mind. But I'm trying to strengthen myself against having those thoughts. I think that's the best way to say that. And to understand that the other person does not know that about me, and they're just looking at this story as a story, not as something that is tethered to me personally. So when I think about it that way objectively, then I'm able to take feedback. So this is another thing that I learned, to be more objective when I'm thinking about it, when I'm getting this feedback from people, to know, and this is very important, to know who is my target audience, who I'm trying to reach, and get those people to give me feedback, not somebody else. And also to be confident about myself. So let's talk about this confidence. So, one of the things that, me looking back at it, right? One of the things that I feel stopped me from writing after I went to this writers' conference and received this super destructive feedback um, for me, right? This is my opinion, was because I wasn't confident in myself. I was still seeing myself as a poser there, because I hadn't published anything. I still haven't, but here I am talking about it, right? So I've gained some confidence since then. And I've gained confidence enough to know that I deserve a place at a writer's or an author's table, that I am deserving of writing these stories, that I should write these stories, that these stories are needed out there. So I had to gain confidence in knowing these things and strengthening my ego, which had been shattered in that confidence. But honestly, I brought it over there bruised already and kind of not in place, not completely um, physical, not completely strong when I went over there, because I felt like I was a poser. And for the longest time, I felt like that's what I was doing. I'm over here posing like I'm a writer, just waiting for people to figure out that I don't belong here, right? And then they may say, "Oh, shoosh, shoosh, get out of the room. You're not one of us." And that was what was in my head for the longest time. And when I took that pause from writing, and and then I started taking informal classes as well as formal classes through the MFA program in National University, then I was able to gain confidence. And this confidence came from feedback from professors, feedback from my classmates, feedback from people that don't even know me, that they're not family members. Because let's be honest, your family, for the most part, right? And your friends are going to say, "Oh, this is great. This is, oh, you're so awesome. You're so talented," and blah, 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 right? But they're supposed to say that. They're your family, they're your friends. If they don't, find yourself a new family and new friends, okay? But, so it took that. And it also took me looking into myself and looking into my writing, seeing writing from before, reading, seeing writing from current, to see the progress. And I needed to see that myself. And that built my confidence. And it built it enough to where I could objectively receive feedback. And this is something that I want to share with you guys, my friends out there in the world that are listening to this, is that feedback is great if it's coming from the right person and if you are in the right mindset to receive it. So, what I'm saying is, if you're not in the right mindset, get yourself there. If the person giving you the feedback is not the right person to give you the feedback and you cannot get away from that environment, simply nod, tell yourself this is not the right person, and keep it moving. And try as hard as you can, as best as you can, to ensure that you strengthen your resolve and you strengthen that wall between that person and you, so that way you understand that while they're giving you this feedback, they're not the right person to tell you this feedback. So you're gonna nitpick it basically, and take what you need from it and discard what you don't need from it. But it's so important for you to be in the right mindset. And when I'm talking about the right mindset, that means for you to know your worth and to know who you are first before you receive feedback from somebody else. Because if you don't, then it's going to be very easy for you to believe the good and the bad, right? The constructive and destructive that that person is giving you. And that person may be right, but also that person may be wrong. And if you are not aware of yourself, then how are you going to know whether they're right or wrong? And that goes with any type of feedback. But most importantly, and what we're talking about here, is the writerly feedback, because as writers, this is something that we need in order to go through the process to get our works published, or in a format where we can present it to others, right? That's how we get it there, through feedback. And one last thing I wanted to leave you with when it comes to feedback, writerly feedback to be specific, is that the person giving it, and whether you're receiving it, right, or you're the one giving it, just I want you to listen closely, because this is something that we as writers and readers can all benefit from, is that the feedback needs to stick closely to the work, right? And what I'm saying is that to leave any personality things out of it, out of the feedback. And this is something that I learned while I was in the MFA program, And because it was a disclaimer in front of the curriculum, and as well as in each class, this was brief. This was one of the first things that the professor will point out, is that we would stick to the text. We will stick to the story elements such as character, setting, tension, pacing, and so forth, right? And we will stick to that. And we would, when we give this feedback, we would put on our reader thinking caps and be like, hey, as a reader, this, I like this, right? Or I dislike this because of this. Or when I read this, this made me feel this way. Or this made me think of this. And then when if you listen to what I just said, it's almost like we are dissecting that story, which is something that we should be doing as readers and writers, right? Maybe not as readers, because as readers, I know I'm trying to escape into another world when I read. But as writers, when we're reading something as a writer, that's what we're doing. We're dissecting the thing. We're looking at that character and see, how is that protagonist? Is that an active protagonist? Is that an inactive one, a passive one? Is it moving too fast right away? Should you take it a little slower here? Should you maybe lengthen your sentences so that way it can go a little slower there? So that way the reader, me as a reader, can savor this moment. Or I felt a little rushed because the sentences were so clipped and they were so close together and short that it made me trottle through the text. This is something that you can say. Or I dislike your character because he just seems like he had it out for the girl the whole time. And then when he reacted this way to something so minor on page 20, it just made me feel like he was out to get her for no reason. You see, so this is kind of feedback that is constructive, because when you're giving this kind of feedback, you are putting your reader thinking cap on, and you're portraying that potential reader for that writer, and how a potential reader will react to the text as they see the text. And you're not attacking the writer itself. And I think that's where we fall short when it comes to feedback. And I think for me specifically, that's what turned me off to feedback, because mind you, that person who gave it to me, the feedback about the language and the slang, was not aware enough, right, of my background, was not aware of what I hold dear, how I do my work, and so forth, right? So it was almost like a little reckless when I received that feedback, because that person was not aware of the writer and the story. And this is very important for you to be aware, but also, right, because it's not solely on the person giving me the feedback. It's not solely their fault. I didn't stand up for myself either, and I didn't explain, look, this is a non-negotiable for me. When it comes to my story is going to have Spanish, it's going to have Spanglish. I'm not itemizing it. Is that how you say it? You guys know what I mean, right? Not doing that to it, right? Because it's not foreign to the story. And but I do that now, you see. So now when I get feedback, I put that as a disclaimer, so that way the person giving me this feedback can go ahead and overlook those things and don't waste their time giving me feedback on the Spanish, English, Spanglish, and slang that is in there, and then just let it be and focus on other aspects of the story. And I did that. I did that as I was writing more, as I gained more confidence on what I wanted my stories to be and how I wanted them to look and to feel. I gained that as I wrote more, and I was able to pass that on to any of my classmates and even the professor that was giving me feedback. So that way, respect can go both ways in that relationship. They can give me respect, and I'm demanding respect as well. You see, so I think that is imperative, it's crucial as well, because what we don't want is, we don't want to stop ourselves from writing especially if it's something that we love and we need to do. And we also don't want to um, not let that person know that this is hurtful, and we're allowing that person to learn and grow as well, the person giving that feedback, so that way next time they give feedback to somebody else, they may think twice before they say certain things. They may think twice before they look at something, right? And they may even ask questions later on to the next person they're giving feedback. Hey, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Is this a non-negotiable thing in your story? Where I looked at that, I think this way, but if you don't want me to look at it, that's fine. I'll leave it alone. You see, feedback is a conversation. It's a relationship. It goes two ways, back and forth between all the people involved. So that's what I wanted to leave you with last is it's not just to gain confidence, and it's not just to seek out the right people, your ideal reader, but it's also to understand who you are as a person, who you are as a writer, what your story is, what you wanted it to be, and what are your non-negotiables, and making sure that you communicate that to people that can potentially give you feedback on your work. So that way they understand you, they understand your work, and their feedback can be constructive. And their feedback is not a waste of time for them or for you, right? Because time is money, ladies and gentlemen, right? We want that time so that way we can make more stories and we can read more stories as well. So I hope you learned something. I know I did a lot since I've been doing this seriously since 2018. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot when it comes to feedback, particularly. But if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, or you have any of your own stories to share when it comes to feedback, don't forget to leave a comment. If you like what we're talking about here and you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe. And I will see you next week. And you know what? Next week, I'll talk about the MFA program and why I did it. And hopefully, if you're on the fence about it yourself, or you're thinking about it, or you're not too sure, then and maybe this could be it, right? Maybe this could give you some idea of what to expect, and maybe you can let you know if it is for you or if it's not. Well, friends, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week to talk about the MFA program. See you.
We could fly. We could fly.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the show. See you on the next episode. Bye.
We could fly.